Has it been a while since you flipped that thermostat from heat to cool? Turn to the experts at Griffith Energy Services before you do for an $88 AC start and check to make sure your AC is in tip-top shape. Griffith specializes in Carrier, but services all brands. Visit GriffithEnergyServices.com today. Your local Carrier expert. That's GriffithEnergyServices.com. License number MD-HVACR 01-2278.
Griffith Energy Services. Doggone dependable.
I'm Robert Conti, Chief of the Metropolitan Police Department. Unfortunately, traffic fatalities are up in the district, and I need your help to reverse this trend. Seatbelts save lives and reduce the risk of death or injury. Click it or ticket.
For over 350 years, the state of South Carolina has been the setting for some of the most horrendous crimes ever committed. Some have gained global notoriety, some have been forgotten, and others have been swept under the rug completely. Now, a state law enforcement operative and a local broadcasting personality have teamed up to examine these heinous acts in detail and have added a fresh perspective of their own. You're listening to Carolina Crimes.
And welcome to this week's edition of Carolina Crimes. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm one of your hosts, Matt Hires, along with
Danielle Myers.
Yes, sir. And we appreciate you being here, as we said earlier, and tuning in to the only weekly episodic podcast dedicated exclusively to true crime in the state of South Carolina. Last week, we had just a methy mess of Troy Burkhart in Townville, South Carolina. And this week, we're going to head to the western part of the state, West Central, and it's going to be in Aiken, South Carolina. But before we get into that, we're going to take care of a little bit of housekeeping. We appreciate everyone's feedback. If you're listening on Apple iTunes or Apple Podcasts, make sure to hit that purple subscribe button. Throw us a 5-star review and just write a little sentence or two about what you enjoy about the show. You can also follow us on Twitter at SCCrimesPod. That's crimes with an S. SCCrimesPod. Or if you have a suggestion for us or would just like to speak with us, please send us an email to carolinacrimespod@gmail.com. And we're also, this is tentative, we're working on a few projects for some T-shirts, hats, merchandise, and the URL for that is going to be www.carolinacrimesstore.com. So be on the lookout for that to come soon. We're going to put that in the show notes. If this is up and running, we're currently struggling trying to be amateur graphic designers, and
I am not an artist.
Holy cow. That's a lot harder than I thought, and now I know why graphic designers are paid so much.
Yep.
And why I am not one. So, and special thanks to my wife, Ashley Hires, for keeping me sane and trying to help out with that. But welcome again to Carolina Crimes, and this week, as we said, we're going to Aiken, South Carolina, which is located, of course, in Aiken County. It's the county seat. It's in central western South Carolina, and on the west it's bordered by the Savannah River and also the state of Georgia just west of that. The city of Aiken, currently it has a population of around 30,889. That was from the last census. And Aiken, South Carolina, this is pretty cool. It was named the best small town in the South by Southern Living magazine.
Really?
Several years ago. So that's really cool. Aiken's one of those places out in western South Carolina. It's kind of like Abbeville. It's one of those I've never been to.
You haven't been to Aiken?
I've never been to Aiken, and by doing my research on the city, it definitely sounds like somewhere I need to go.
Yeah,
it
it's a really
cool.
it's a cute city. I actually went to Aiken Technical College for a couple semesters before coming back up to Columbia to pursue criminal justice. And but it's a cute little city. It's one of those typical southern towns where, though it continues to grow and develop with businesses and houses and population, it still maintains that small town feel, and everybody knows everybody, and people have been there for years and never left, and a lot like my hometown of Lexington.
Right. Now, Aiken, it was named for William Aiken, who was the South Carolina Canal and Railroad Company's former president. And it was named Aiken in 1835. Now, back in the day, back in the 1800s, Aiken, it could be considered quite progressive for an old South town. And I found this really interesting that 3 of Aiken's founders back in 1871 were African Americans. So we're 6 years removed from the Civil War, and, I think 7 or 8 years removed from the Emancipation Proclamation. And here are 3 town founders that are African American. They were Prince Rivers, Charles D. Hayne, and this fella, Samuel J. Lee. I found this enthralling. Samuel J. Lee, one of the African American founders of Aiken, he ended up being the Speaker of the House of the South Carolina State House, and he was the first black man admitted to the South Carolina bar. So the first African American lawyer in South Carolina. And he's also a veteran of the Civil War, but fought for the Confederacy.
Okay.
So you don't hear about that every day. That's
but that's an interesting little fact.
Yeah, and that's crazy. Now, Aiken, in your research, what did you come up with? You found out they had a pretty good reputation for something.
Yeah, it being such a small town and you not have ever visiting there, Aiken is actually considered thoroughbred country, which has a lot of facilities where they train horses that will eventually race in the Kentucky Derby.
Yes, and Aiken, they also host 2 large steeplechase horse racing events. One is the Imperial Cup in March, and also the Holiday Cup in October. And both of those races, this is wild, they bring over 30,000 spectators to each event. So the population of Aiken doubles when they have a horse race going down over in Aiken. And then in 19th century Aiken, Aiken served as a winter retreat for the Bostwicks, which were with U.S. Steel, the Vanderbilts, and the Whitneys. So a lot of elite from up north, they kind of wintered in the Aiken area. And there's a large polo playing population in Aiken, which, again, it has to do with horses and things of the equine nature. I don't know how to make that plural, but, the equine variety, but it has an Aiken Polo Club, and which is still active to this day, which is wild. I don't think I've ever seen polo either, so maybe we need to go to Aiken.
I know, there's a lot of big things going on in a small town.
Right. Now, on November 30th, 1950, the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, they selected a site in Aiken County for a plant to produce thermonuclear weapons along the Savannah River. And that is known today as Savannah River Site, or to locals there, the bum plant. So the bomb plant. And which is wild to know that something that important and that serious that's located in Aiken County. Now, several notable Aiken natives, they include Lee Atwater, who was the right-hand man and strategist for Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Now, William and Michael Dean Perry of football fame. Now, William Perry, and William the Refrigerator Perry, who played at Clemson, as did Michael Dean, and then he went on to play defensive tackle for the Chicago Bears and the Philadelphia Eagles. And William Perry, I still remember his Super Bowl 20 with the Bears won in 1985, and William Perry, his big 300-pound frame lunging in for a touchdown against the New England Patriots. Also, Devereaux Milburn is a native of Aiken. This seems super important. He was a 10-goal polo player and is known as one of the Big Four in polo, which was a group from the U.S. that competed internationally in polo matches. So quite an accomplished polo player. Not really sure what that means. I'd love to get more in depth with that and learn more about it.
Who knows? You could become a polo player one day.
Man,
I'd like to see that.
I don't know. I don't have the frame for a.
I'll go to your tournaments,
Yeah,
or whatever they call them.
Well, they better have my horse to be a Clydesdale or something. I don't think I could. I don't want to. That's animal abuse. And also, one of the final notable Aiken natives is 7'4", 540-pound Paul White.
Oh my gosh!
Now, Paul White is also known as the WWE's Big Show.
Wow.
So he is from Aiken. So that is quite a roster and quite an eclectic roster of folks from Aiken, South Carolina. Well, Danielle, you're gonna walk us through this. It's thoroughbred country, and you're gonna steeplechase over some hurdles and run the horses on this story today. And I believe it starts in August of 2000.
It does, and there will be some hurdles in this story, but that's not uncommon in a lot of the ones that we've covered. But we'll start back in 1983. Jessica Lynn Carpenter was born on July 9th of 1983 in Waukegan, Lake County, Illinois, to Charlie and Judy Carpenter. She was the youngest of three sisters. She was high energy, always on the go. She was a lot of fun to be around, very sweet and caring, easy to get along with. A lot of people just really liked her, liked being in her presence. She played church basketball, participated in pageants in her high school, and was in the high school band. And she had a lot of big dreams of either becoming a top model or a pediatrician because she loved children. So big dreams and very, very different avenues that she could have gone down. But either way, everybody believed that she would have been very successful, whatever she chose.
And you'll see pictures of Jessica on Carolina Crimes Podcast on Facebook, and we talked about pageants, and she was an attractive young lady, but not one of these that you would picture to be unapproachable. She just looked like a very kind smile, kind eyes, looked like someone you could be friends with and hang out with. Very down to earth.
Oh, yeah. She was one of those girls. I don't know, obviously you don't know this part of it with high school, being a high school girl, but, the popular girl, the one that's really pretty, everyone loves them. They're just, well known throughout the school, and you automatically want to hate them because they kind of look down on everybody, and you have a reason to. And I feel like she would be the exact opposite, where she's popular, she's pretty, and you kind of want to hate her, but you can't because she's so nice and just kind of flows into every crowd and, just fits in wherever she goes. And that just kind of seemed like that was the person that she was, and just made friends everywhere she went and just treated everybody, as if she wanted to be treated.
Right.
I mean,
that makes you sound really mean. By the way,
Thank you.
I wanted to hate someone, but
listen,
I get it.
Listen, I know I'm not the only female who was a high school girl at one point who felt that way, but I've grown a lot since high school. I hope that I have. So I don't look at things like that anymore. But
and sharing a house with two high school girls currently, I mean,
they can get vicious, okay? They can get vicious. Yeah. And I had three sisters, so I have plenty of experience.
Yeah, some nights I feel like an MMA referee, but yeah. So Jessica Carpenter was very, very approachable, and by all means, what people around Aiken said, just a great young lady, someone everyone wanted to be around and know. And
unfortunately, those big dreams that she had, no matter what avenue she was choosing to go down, it wasn't in the cards for her. On August 4th of 2000, it is a hot summer afternoon. It gets very hot here in August. And it was in Crossland Park. 17-year-old Jessica was a rising senior at Aiken High School, and she was home for her summer break. I believe school usually starts at the end of end of August here, so she was probably getting ready to go back for her senior year. And her mother, Judy, had come home that day for her lunch break to have lunch with Jessica because she would take advantage of her being home during the day, and they would spend time and eat lunch. And Jessica made lunch for them, and they ate. And spent time together, and her mother left the house about 12:30 to get back to work by her 1 o'clock, end of lunch period. So when Judy got off at 5 o'clock like she does every day, she stopped to run a couple of errands before she arrived back home around 5:30 at this point. Mm-hmm. And as she was opening the door, she could hear Jessica's cell phone ringing inside, but it was continuing to ring and it wasn't being answered, which she immediately thought was a little weird because Jessica always answered her phone, like most teenage girls do.
Right.
And so Judy walked in, and immediately in the living room she saw Jessica lying on the floor, nude. It was very clear that something was wrong. She ran outside to her car, got her car phone, and she dialed 911. The operator had asked her if her daughter was breathing. She said she didn't know. She just ran out of the house and called for help. The operator told Judy to go back into the house and check to see if her daughter was breathing. And even though Judy was hesitant because she was afraid to go back inside, she didn't want to have to see what she felt she was going to see. She went back inside, and she immediately knew that Jessica was dead. Her eyes were rolled back in her head. She was cold to the touch. And she also noticed that the phone cord in the house had been cut because the living room was right by the kitchen, so she could see that.
A nightmare for any parent,
yes.
You can imagine.
Yes. And so the police and paramedics arrived within minutes of the phone call and eventually called Detective Ray Scott and Captain Dwayne Courtney of the Aiken Public Safety, and they arrived at the scene. And they noted Jessica lying in the living room. She had a phone cord wrapped tightly around her neck. Her throat had been cut, and she was naked. And it was immediately clear by the looks of the body and of the house that she had been raped. There had been a struggle, and she had been strangled.
Wow.
They also noticed that there wasn't a lot of blood around her, considering the fact that her throat had been cut. So this made them believe that she was either unconscious or was already deceased when her throat had been cut. Otherwise, it would have produced a lot of blood. And they ended up looking around the house. They noticed that there was, some disarray in the living room, her bedroom, where they believe is where she was made to disrobe, and where probably is where the sexual assault took place. And crime scene investigators took DNA samples from Jessica's body, and they found a partial fingerprint. But other than that, there just wasn't a lot of physical evidence with this crime scene, which is weird considering, how disarray the house was. You would think something more would show up, but they that was the only thing that they had found.
Right, and it would be hard to look at suspects. You start looking at a girl nobody had a grudge against. I mean, a wonderful, kind soul like Jessica. And then again, at the age of 17, she really haven't had time to make any enemies yet in the world.
And the fact that this had happened in the middle of the day.
Right.
A lot of people, you don't expect to have such a brutal attack, which takes some time, in the middle of the day.
Right, and obviously, well, I say obviously, but I think anyone being attacked, one of their first intuitions and instincts is to scream or make some noise. Mm-hmm. And with no clues coming from that, or I don't know if the neighbors heard anything during the day or if anybody was home, because this was during the summer. Yeah,
I mean, the only reason she was home is because she was out of school for the summer. Otherwise, she wouldn't have even been there. So, and I'm sure all the neighbors were at work. Her mom was at work. So I don't think that they had a lot of big leads as far as the physical evidence at the scene or even having witnesses in the neighborhood. And before leaving, they did note one last thing, that there was no forced entry into this house. The windows were shut tight. The back door was locked, and this led them to wonder if this was done by somebody that she knew. She let this person in the house. They didn't have to force their way in. So that makes it even more, scary and more like, is this somebody, and the neighbor and everyone in the community is in fear at this point because such a brutal attack happened in a neighborhood to a unsuspecting person. And then they found out that it wasn't even a forced entry, so was
Right.
it somebody within their own community?
Or someone that Jessica was familiar with.
Yeah.
You know, that she knew and let in.
Was it someone she went to school with? You know? I mean, they see her all the time. They know her. And, so that was what led them to believe that they needed to start looking at her inner circle. And everyone in the community, like I said, was in fear. And during the autopsy, they did do vaginal swabs, and it contained her DNA along with an unknown male. So eventually, police knew that they had to turn to the only piece of evidence from the crime scene that they ended up having, which was that unknown male DNA.
Yeah.
And Captain Courtney said that if we must line people up like a DUI checkpoint, we'll have a DNA checkpoint. He goes, they were determined to get that DNA. And this led them to begin taking samples from everyone that they could think of, any male coworkers of her mom's, her father, her classmates at her school, the garbage man that regularly went around her neighborhood, the mailman who was possibly there that day in the neighborhood, the UPS driver. He said if you were a male in Aiken, South Carolina, you got your DNA taken.
Wow. That's a pretty big dragnet there for the authorities.
And unfortunately, they collected hundreds of DNA, submitted them to the state lab, and I think he even said that the forensic technician was probably annoyed with how many requests he was sending in, keeping her busy. But unfortunately, none came back with a match. So now police are having to try to figure out who else they can be looking at, because they've already put everybody that could possibly be in contact with her regularly. So who could this be?
And we seem to come up on this topic a lot here on Carolina Crimes, of, a vicious attack, a sexual assault, and the DNA not matching. And it almost always comes up to the authorities thinking outside the box.
Yes.
And even going all the way back to episode 1.
Yeah.
With Crystal Faye Todd. Mm-hmm. And going back to that, where that was, I think, the first case in South Carolina DNA was used as evidence. But this is starting to kind of be a recurring theme that authorities run up on a mystery. It's not always the first person you think.
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to, you just have to, like you said, think outside the box and just realize that things are more than what they appear. And, that's the part of investigation, is having to look at a lot more people would do it if it was as easy as just having it there. Yeah. Right.
That's the definition of investigation.
Yep. And they got to dig. And police finally did receive a tip from a neighbor that told them that there was a weird man that had been hanging outside of Jessica's house. And police also realized that this same guy became a regular at Jessica's gravesite. And police will usually go to funerals. And sometimes, especially when it's, a murder investigation that isn't solved, they'll go and look at the gravesite too, because they want to check. Because believe it or not, a lot of times the people, which doesn't make sense, but the people that have committed these crimes will actually come back to the funeral, or they'll go to the gravesite. And a lot of times they'll either do it because they feel guilt, or they want to be able to actually see these people, what they've done to these people, and be like, I did that, and just knowing that they're standing in this crowd and nobody knows. And
taking pleasure in it, a lot like the Gaffney Strangler that we talked about. Mm-hmm. He went to one of his victims' funerals, one of their wakes, and just because he wanted that little piece of pleasure, that sick piece of pleasure, that he was the only person in the room that knew exactly what was going on. And he was smarter than everybody else. They couldn't get him.
He was able to fool all these people. And so they did. They ended up putting hidden security cameras around her gravesite, and saw that this guy was just kind of acting odd anytime he'd come to her grave, and I guess kind of talking and just stuff that they were like, they didn't even know who this person was. And all of a sudden he's showing there up at her gravesite all the time. They eventually tracked him down. They interviewed him, took his DNA. And there was no match on the DNA. And they later learned that he was just a student that went to high school with her that was deeply affected by her death. So when 2 weeks after the murder, police did do a search of Jessica's computer. And they found an email that had been sent to her shortly after her death that said, "Live hard, die young, and leave a pretty corpse." So that's a pretty interesting statement. And when we get back, we'll find out exactly what police found when they dug deeper into this cryptic email
weird.
That was sent. And we'll be right back with a word from our sponsors.
Hi, listeners. Matt Hires here to tell you about our friends at Shopava.store. Shopava is your one-stop online shop for practically all of your online shopping needs at bargain prices. Visit www.shopava.store, that's SHOPIVA.store, and check out their huge selection of home goods, decor, tools, electronics, health and beauty items, and ladies, all your makeup needs, and fashion for men and women. And yes, they've even got snacks, all at the best prices that you'll find online. Check out Shopava.store, www.shopIVA.store. And yes, Carolina Crimes listeners, you're going to get a 10% discount just for shopping with Chris and the gang over at Shopava.store. Just use the promo code Carolina Crimes. Again, that's Shopava.store, www.shopIVA.store.
I'm Robert Conti, Chief of the Metropolitan Police Department. Unfortunately, traffic fatalities are up in the district, and I need your help to reverse this trend. Seatbelts save lives and reduce the risk of death or injury. Click it or ticket. I'm Robert Conti, Chief of the Metropolitan Police Department. I have an urgent message. Unfortunately, traffic fatalities have increased in D.C., and I need your help to reverse this troubling trend. Did you know that using a seatbelt can drastically reduce the risk of death or serious injury to you or a loved one? Seatbelts save lives, and together we can accomplish a safer community. Let's make Vision Zero a reality in D.C. Always wear your seatbelt. Click it or ticket.
I think what flavor of these new Dunkin' coconut refreshers you get says a lot about you.
Really? What's it say about me?
Well, you got the refreshing golden peach because you're vibrant, fun, and positive.
Oh, what about me?
The bold purple pomegranate means you're vibrant, fun, and positive.
I take it I got this delicious pink strawberry because I'm vibrant, fun, and positive.
Yeah, it's a simple system, really.
Share the shine. Enjoy a medium Dunkin' coconut refresher for $3. Order ahead plus earn rewards. America runs on Dunkin'. Participation may vary. Limited time offer. Excludes classic Dunkin' refreshers.
Welcome back to Carolina Crimes. Thank you for that word from our sponsors. And when we left off, Jessica's email, investigators had discovered something kind of weird, a cryptic email that had been sent to her inbox after her death, Danielle.
Yeah, and it was one line, and it said, "Live hard, die young, and leave a pretty corpse." So, of course, that made police their ears perk up and say, what is this? We need to look at this person. And they were able to trace the email to the sender and learned that it was 24-year-old Phil Wiegand, who lived alone on the outside of town. He would let young teens come into his house. He'd provide them with alcohol and pornography. Just the kind of, I guess his place was the place for the teens to party and do all these illegal things. And so detectives reached out to him, interviewed him. They took his DNA.
Yeah, he's the creepy older guy that kind of
keeps hanging out with the high schoolers. We've had some of those in our stories.
Yeah, yuck.
And it came back as not being a match. And they just learned that this guy had his issues, but he wasn't a killer. And they ended up with another dead end. So Aiken police then decided to recruit Lieutenant Michael Prodon, a criminal profiler for SLED, to come up with who they believe could have done this. And he believed that the person was a Caucasian male. They said a lot of same-race crimes are more common than interracial crimes. So they believed it was somebody, a Caucasian male, late 20, early 30s, someone who was really familiar with the area. And 2 months later, on October 10th, the local news station received word from the police force across the border in Georgia that there had been another attack. And Sheriff Richard Roundtree was working violent crimes with the Richmond County Sheriff's Department at the time when he got a sexual assault and burglary call. He arrived at the scene and saw a young woman lying on the floor, clinging to life. Her wounds were so severe, Roundtree didn't think that she would survive the trip to the hospital, but he told her she needed to live so that they could find out who did this to her.
Wow.
And miraculously, 18-year-old Chrissy Lee Barton survived.
Oh, poor thing.
And she ended up being able to tell police, and also she did an interview with the media to talk about what happened. And she said that she had met a man in a parking lot. He offered to take modeling pictures for her. She asked him for a card for proof that he was legit and who he said he was, but he never ended up showing her anything. Instead, the man asked if he could follow her home, because I guess that was going to be the scene of this photo shoot.
Oh, my gosh.
And reluctantly, she agreed, but the ominous thing about this is she asked him before they headed that way, "You're not going to try and kill me, are you?"
Mm-hmm. Well, let me stop right here. I don't think it needs to be said, but if you're a young teenage female or male, you probably don't need to be listening to this because it's adult content. But if someone ever approaches you and wants to take modeling pictures of you,
and it only can be done at your house and nobody else is there,
yeah, probably a pervert. It's probably not going to end well.
No. And if you have
I'll say 99.99% of the time, yeah, that's not how modeling works.
No.
They don't meet you in a parking lot.
And a lot of times they don't come to you, I don't think. I think that you got to work your way. You got to convince them. It's not the other way around.
So, sorry to interrupt.
No, I completely agree. A little PSA.
Yeah, that's another PSA. Yeah.
We have a lot of those. But also, if you have to ask someone, "You're not going to try and kill me, are you?" probably means that you might need to second guess the decision you're about to make.
Right.
And his response was, no, I wouldn't do anything like that. So, liar.
Trustworthy. Yeah.
Once back at her house, I think it was very clear that this was not going to be a modeling shoot. And this man, he then raped, strangled, and then stabbed her 3 times in the neck with a steak knife. He thought she was dead, so he leaves. She drifted in and out of consciousness before crawling to her phone and calling 911.
Wow.
Police in Aiken believe that this man was their guy because the cases were so similar. You know, both were young women who had been raped in their home, they had been strangled, and their throats had been cut or they had been stabbed in the neck, a wound to the neck. And so it looked like there was a lot of commonality between these two crimes. Right. And, in Georgia, Augusta, Georgia's right beside Aiken, South Carolina.
Right. There's very close proximity between the two towns.
Yeah, so it's not uncommon that this would happen, not far from where Jessica's murder took place. And Chrissy was also able to provide a description of this man, which led to a sketch being released. And as soon as the sketch hit the news, tips poured in. And one call actually came from Jessica's former coworker at Red Lobster, who said that she recognized the man. She said she had seen him the Friday before Jessica was killed, and they were sitting in their car in a parking lot when he approached both girls asking for directions. They proceeded to explain and tell him where exactly he needed to go, and he then asked if he could follow them.
Wow.
To where? Because I'm not going where you're going.
Yeah, so this modeling recruiter comes up with this, and then he showed up. He was recognized as being at Jessica's place of work.
Yes.
Earlier.
And they said they had the work, the Red Lobster on their shirts or the name tags or whatever. So it was, he knew that where they worked, it wouldn't be hard for him to come back and try to find her. And, so then it was like, could it be this person? Because less than a week later, Jessica was dead.
Right.
So a week after this tip came in, a woman called the Richmond Sheriff's Department in Georgia and said that the man in the sketch was her brother-in-law, and he drove a teal car. So Augusta police immediately put out an APB, which is all points bulletin, to be on the lookout for a Ronaldo J. Rivera and his teal car.
And a teal car, that's...
I've seen the picture. It doesn't blend into a crowd.
It's not inconspicuous.
No.
I think it would be a little more common maybe in the early 2000s. I mean, they had some really terrible automobile colors back then, fuchsia and the Dodge Neons and all that stuff. So I would think it'd be a little more prevalent then, but teal, it would definitely stick out.
Yes, and it did, because Augusta police eventually spotted this vehicle at a motel in Aiken County. And apparently police showed up just in time because Rivera had tried to kill himself by slitting his wrists, but they were able to get there in time to save his life. After looking around the motel room, they saw that the news had been on, so it was very clear that they were looking for him. He probably got spooked, but they also found a note on the side table that said, "I didn't kill Jessica Carpenter." So,
Yeah, I mean,
saying I didn't do it makes you go, "You did it." So you have to wonder why. That's very specific.
Yeah, you're a guy that stalks teenage girls in a parking lot, poses as a model recruiter, and rapes them and kills them.
Yes,
but we're supposed to trust your note.
Yes, because he wrote it down.
Your death note.
That's exactly what it is. So after he got out of the hospital, recovered from his injuries, police were finally able to interview Rivera. But instead of confessing to Jessica's murder, he stuns police by admitting to other murders. He stated that he had sodomized, raped, and strangled a 17-year-old on June 29th, 2000, which was just a month or so before Jessica was killed.
No, a couple days. She was on the 4th of August.
This was in June.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You can give me a calendar.
Listen, I'm not good at math, so you had me thinking for a second.
Well,
no.
Obviously I'm not good. I don't own a calendar, so...
And then another on September 5th. So now they've got these two other killings that he's talked about. And after, by the end of the interview and after into it for a while, in total, he admitted to killing 4 young girls. So now we have a serial killer, similar circumstances, similar geographical area, and police, especially in Aiken, just knew that this was the person that they believed to be responsible for Jessica's murder. The problem: he made multiple confessions about multiple killings and always denied that one of those victims was Jessica.
Yeah, and you'd think, well, he wouldn't just leave that out just to leave it out.
No. Because serial killers want to take credit for their work.
Yeah, he's spilling the beans about everything else, but not Jessica, so maybe he's telling the truth about that one.
And they brought him in for multiple interviews and continued to interview him about Jessica, and he would get aggravated every time he was asked about her, saying, "Why would I tell you about bodies you didn't even know about and not confess to this one?"
Yeah, that's the truth.
And you always want to take, you don't want to take criminals at their word, but at the same time, when it comes to serial killers want to have credit taken for their work, and nothing pisses them off more when another person is held responsible for something they did.
Right.
That'll make them mad more than anything, and it's a weird, sick thing, but
yeah. And he's
true.
he's a piece of garbage, but not that piece of garbage, not this specific piece of garbage.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's a garbage, but
he's
I'm
terrible.
a murderer, but I'm not Jessica's murderer, so don't label that.
He's
on
terrible,
me.
But he's not terrible in that case.
But police still weren't convinced. You can't always take what a person says at their word, especially someone who's just admitted to brutally attacking and murdering 4 young girls. So they ended up getting a warrant for his DNA and had to wait on bated breath. I know that a lot of times if you watch these crime shows, if you the true crime shows versus the TV crime shows. A lot of times on the true crime shows, police will say this is not like what you see on TV, and you don't always get a match 10 minutes later. It takes time, especially because you're sent into a state law enforcement division. They're coming from all over the state with their evidence, so people are having to, they get backlogged, and you just have to wait. So by January of 2001, the DNA results came back, and it wasn't a match.
Wow. So Rivera was telling the truth all along.
Yep. So he did get arrested and charged for murdering 4 women, and in this process, the good thing is, as aggravated as the police and detectives were about not getting a DNA match, at least they caught inadvertently a serial killer.
Yeah, I mean,
how many people can say that they did that? So they at least stopped him from continuing, which he obviously would have.
But unfortunately for Jessica's family and her sisters, they had to continue this nightmare of not knowing what happened to Jessica.
Especially because police, though they had this belief before with him, they just knew it in their gut that this was the person. And when the DNA said it wasn't, you can't argue with that. So they were at a standstill, which unfortunately a lot of these cases that we cover, we find is the case with these investigators, where they get to a point where they hit wall after wall.
Right. And it's not always, Miss Scarlett in the billiard room with the rope. It's not that easy.
Yeah, and it's a kick in the gut, and it's something that they do because they want to find this. They want to bring justice to this victim, and they also want to bring closure as much as they can to the families. And the longer this case goes unsolved, the more unlikely it is that it will get solved. But 2 years after Jessica's murder,
2002.
Yep, on August 19th, 2002, to be specific, Detective Scott was in his office when he received a call from the forensic technician at SLED saying that they had a match. And it was a name that no one had ever heard of. And when we come back from this break, we're going to find out exactly who this DNA belonged to after a quick word from our sponsors.
Sunday at 8/7 Central on Lifetime, the premiere of an all-new Ripped from the Headlines movie, Soccer Mom Madam. Inspired by true events, Anna, a single soccer mother of 2, starts an escort service to provide for her family. Her double life as a madam may catch up to her flawless suburban persona, as more money brings more problems. Can she stay under the radar? Jana Kramer stars in Soccer Mom Madam. Premieres next Sunday at 8, only on Lifetime.
Simplify your federal agency's technology procurement with Connection Public Sector Solutions. Connection's dedicated account managers, commitment to exceptional customer service, and extensive catalog of federal contracts make IT purchases quick, easy, and affordable. Turn your challenges into opportunities and get rid of your technology pain points with Connection today. Learn more about what's possible with Connection Public Sector Solutions at connection.com/fedcontracts.
Enviar nota de voz al group chat. Buenos días, ¿quieren desayuno de McDonald's?
Guille dice, eres la mejor. Un sausage McMuffin, please. Laura dice, sí, sausage McGriddles para mí. Ale dice, ya comí, pero me traes un hash browns, love you.
Mi colega favorita, Jill. Llévate todos tus favoritos de desayuno como un sausage McMuffin por unos pocos dólares, solo en el $1, $2, $3 menú de McDonald's. Precios y participación pueden variar, no puede ser combinado con un combo meal.
And welcome back to Carolina Crimes. We appreciate our sponsors and those messages from them. And Danielle, when we left off, Aiken County authorities, they received a call from SLED saying that they had found a match 2 years later of DNA for the killer of Jessica Carpenter.
Yes. And it was of course, an exciting moment for the detectives who had worked so hard and constantly found themselves hitting dead end after dead end. But when the technician said the name of the person that this DNA match came back to, it was nobody they had heard of. The match belonged to 31-year-old Robert F. Atkins, a resident of nearby Augusta, Georgia. So now police had a name, but where did this guy come from?
How did he fit into this whole scenario? How did he...
it was...
gain entry to Jessica's home?
Yes. And so this is when police had to figure this out. So apparently this DNA came from when Atkins had been arrested for violating his probation on a theft charge in the state of Georgia. And at the time, Georgia was only one of the few states that collected DNA from inmates during intake when they're being brought into prison. South Carolina didn't even do this at the time. Now, all states do this. But at the time, it wasn't the case. And Georgia, luckily, was one of the few that did. So when he was arrested, his DNA on this probation violation, his DNA had been taken and entered into the national database, which we know as CODIS. And it hit on a DNA that had been entered years earlier from Jessica's murder. And at the time, Atkins was being held at Ware State Prison in Georgia. So Detective Scott decided to go down and pay him a visit. At first, Atkins denied knowing Jessica. He didn't know anything about this crime. I don't know nothing about nothing.
Yeah, keeping tight-lipped.
Yep.
Yeah.
But after they laid out the evidence against him, he eventually looked at Detective Scott and he said, "I'm sorry." And at the time, he then asked for the interview to be stopped, which if they do that and then request a lawyer, you have to.
Right. That's your Miranda rights.
And, of course, it's one of the most frustrating things for detectives. So Detective Scott did something that he says he hated more than anything to have to do. But he did it because you do what you got to do to get a confession. And he rolled his chair over to Atkins. He put his hand on his shoulder, started talking to him, trying to find some kind of common ground, talking about religion, just get this off your chest. And eventually he said he hugged him tight around the neck, and that was the part that he really hated to have to do. But it worked out because eventually Atkins decided to continue this interview, and he ultimately confessed to killing Jessica, saying that he didn't have a choice because she had seen his face. So was this just a random act? Well, that's exactly what it turned out to be. I don't think a crime could probably be more random than this one. And police dug into who exactly this person was, what his connections were, living in Augusta, Georgia, and this crime's happening over the border in Aiken. What brought him over here, what brought him specifically into Jessica's neighborhood. And they learned that Robert Atkins had been a delivery driver for a courier company in Georgia called Airborne Express. I'd never heard of this company. Kevin said he had. Yes, I have. But they're not around anymore. But
no, it was Airborne Express was, I guess you can consider them a competitor of FedEx and UPS.
Yeah, reading up on it, that's what it looked like.
Yeah, I think they were yellow trucks with red lettering.
Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they were, of course, not as prevalent. That's why they're not around today.
Yep, and this is the first time me hearing about them, so
right.
Shows how long it's been since they've been around. And apparently a week before the murder, Atkins had delivered a package to the Carpenter home. And this is when he first meets Jessica, because apparently, she's home on her summer break, home by herself. So, of course, who's the one that answered the door? I don't think at the time, a lot of times people rang doorbells and then wanted someone to, they didn't always leave packages so freely on porches like they do now.
Not like Amazon today.
Yeah, so there was an interaction where someone opens the door, and this is when he first meets her. And so a few days later, his delivery route brings him back to the neighborhood. But this time, he didn't have a delivery. I think his route was near her neighborhood, and he had been thinking about her, and he just inadvertently ended up getting himself back over into her neighborhood. So he knocks on her door, and Jessica answers, And when she answers, he said that he had dropped a package off there by accident and he needed to get it back. She said, I don't have anything. There wasn't anything that was delivered here. So he asked if he could use her phone to call work, which seemed to make sense considering, let me call work and find out, did someone give me the wrong address? So it seemed to work for her because she was a trusting person.
Right. And around 2000s, nowadays we just say, well, screw you, go use your own cell phone. You're not coming in my house.
Yeah, the ruse of getting into someone's house to use their phone won't work now. Right.
Mm-hmm. But back then, yes, there were cell phones. I think I had a Nokia digital one in 2000, but everyone still had a house phone at this point.
Well, I told you when her mother discovered Jessica at first, she ran back to her car to use her car phone to call 911.
Yeah,
so she probably didn't even have, that was her version of a cell phone. So he goes in the house. He took the phone and acted like he was dialing a number, pretending like he was talking to somebody. And then he hung up the phone and then immediately he grabbed Jessica and drug her down the hall to her room where he forced her to disrobe and he raped her. He then took her back into the living room. He ended up getting a knife from the kitchen drawer, and he cut the phone cord, wrapped it tightly around her neck until she passed out, and then he proceeded to cut her throat. Mm-mm. But this is the real kicker. Afterwards, he left and got back into his work truck and then proceeded to finish up his deliveries as if nothing had happened. And he even went as far as to pick up a marriage license because he got married the next day.
That's a cold-hearted son of a bitch, right?
Just to keep going, living your best life as if you didn't just do this.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, just the callousness of that. You rape and take the life of a young, vibrant young lady and then go on to get married, the next day. Just go along with your delivery route. Nothing happened.
Well, Detective Scott also learned later that 4 days after Jessica's murder, because this guy's still going around town delivering, doing his thing, and he found out that there was actually a package that was delivered to the Aiken County Sheriff's Department, and his wife, Detective Scott's wife, actually worked at the front, and Adkins was the one that delivered the package, and she signed for it.
Wow.
And he said, and I'm in the back 15 feet away from this guy. Yeah. Knowing what he did, now I know, but at the time, and it just showed the brazenness of this guy.
He thought this was okay.
No remorse. I mean, that's not somebody that, that's not remorseful behavior. So after this confession and after everything that he explained had happened, Detective Scott did have one question left for Adkins, and that was where was the murder weapon, which was the knife that was taken out of Jessica's own home. And Adkins said it was a knife that he had taken out of the kitchen, and it was located about a mile outside of the city off of a small paved road that's generally used by clay companies. And so Detective Scott called the forensic people, other detectives, to go out there to look. It had been 2 years since this murder. There's been so much foot traffic, regular traffic.
People cutting the grass on the roadside, I'm sure.
So they were like, what are the chances? But we're going to look out here anyways. And they found it.
Oh, my God. That part of these investigations absolutely blows my mind. How years after the fact, a lot like the Annie Tehan television.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, that these murder weapons and these things still exist and they're still findable.
And
That's amazing.
And the fact that the detectives even make the effort to go look instead of going, it's been 2 years, we're not going to find it. But they look anyways, and they might come up empty-handed, but you don't know unless you try. And they were successful. So on August 30th, 2002, with the DNA match and now a murder weapon, Adkins is formally charged with the rape and murder of Jessica Carpenter. And on Monday, May 22nd, 2006, which I thought about it, May was 22nd was yesterday.
Right.
So right. We're coming up on that, and that was 6 years after Jessica had been killed. Robert Adkins pled guilty to murder, criminal sexual conduct first, kidnapping, possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime, and burglary. And by him pleading to all 5 of these charges, he was spared the death penalty and instead was given 2 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus an additional 30 years. And he is actually currently incarcerated at Perry Correctional Institute in Greenville, South Carolina.
Wow. So just desserts for this heinous man and this act, the murder and rape of Jessica Carpenter. And just he extinguished a bright light, it seemed like, in this world.
And it was all for nothing. Not saying that, there needs to be a reason for killing somebody,
no
but
motive.
I mean, it was literally just because, and police believed he saw her. He's noticed that she was an attractive girl. He went about his business but couldn't get her out of his mind. And when he showed back up, they said there was complete intent, and he knew exactly what he was going to do when he showed up at her doorstep that day, which makes it even worse,
planned.
Which means that she just, taking advantage of a person who has such an open heart and is so trusting and didn't think anything of inviting someone in their home just trying to help somebody out. And, she lost her life for it, which is unfortunate. But, the DNA, it doesn't lie.
No, it doesn't. And fortunately, he was caught to bring some kind of solace to Jessica's family. And we appreciate you listening here to this week's edition of Carolina Crimes. It's coming out. This episode is going to be published Memorial Day weekend, so we hope everyone has a great Memorial Day, a safe Memorial Day. Keep in mind what today is all about, remembering those that gave the ultimate sacrifice for us. If you're listening to this podcast on Apple Podcast or Apple iTunes, make sure to hit that purple subscribe button. Throw us a 5-star review and write us a little something, couple sentences there about what you think about the show. We appreciate all your positive reviews. Follow us on Twitter at SCCrimesPod. That's crimes with an S. Also, Danielle, I think you've hooked us up with an Instagram.
I did.
Yes. How do people get to that? I'm not an Instagram head.
I was for a half a minute, and then I told you my account got hacked. And it was hacked by someone who took all my pictures, which wasn't very many, and replaced them with a bunch of cat photos.
I like cats.
I wasn't mad. It could have been worse. And
That's
I did think that, so I said it could have absolutely been worse. But I decided to try it again because the last thing that I wanted to do, I wanted to try to give us a little insight to where people can see us doing like behind the scenes kind of thing. We can also, it's another way to let people know about our episodes. And eventually, fingers crossed, I'm hoping to get it where Matt and I can put pictures up of our animals that we talk about, and you get to see us in the studio and just a little behind the scenes. And I think it was just something fun to kind of do, get a little insight. So it's on Instagram, and it's Carolina Crimes Pod.
Yeah, just like our email, carolinacrimespod@gmail.com. Instagram. Is there an @ symbol before that, or it's just
no? It's just Carolina
it's
Crimes
just Carolina
Pod.
Crimes Pod. I don't know.
Listen, if you follow us on Facebook right now, currently I have the picture as the Carolina Crimes picture that we have on Facebook, so you should be able to pinpoint the same. And I've got a few photos up there. I'm working on getting some more uploaded. I try to not creepily take pictures of us in the studio so that I can put some pictures up to let y'all see kind of how we go about doing what we do. And
yeah, and so
what goes into it.
kind of a peek behind the curtain.
That's right.
Well, thank you again for listening. We look forward to seeing you next week, and we are going to go to the most populous county in the state of South Carolina, Greenville. You're on deck. Have a great Memorial Day, folks. Thank you for listening to Carolina Crimes.
I'm a cover girl.
I'm a cover girl.
I'm a cover girl, too, because I use CoverGirl Simply Ageless Liquid Foundation.
America's #1 anti-aging foundation brand.
Simply Ageless is skincare and makeup in one.
It instantly reduces the look of wrinkles and even skin tone.
With hyaluronic complex and vitamin C for plump skin and a healthy youthful glow.
So be a cover girl like me.
And me.
And get better skin at any age.
Try Simply Ageless Liquid Foundation.
From easy, breezy, beautiful,
CoverGirl.
Is it time for a new heating and cooling system? Turn to the experts at Griffith Energy Services and Carrier today and get 0% financing for 18 months on a new heating and cooling system. Get the comfort you deserve from Griffith Energy Services and Carrier. Visit griffitenergyservices.com today for this and other exclusive offers. That's griffitenergyservices.com. License number MDHVACR 01-2278.
Griffith Energy Services. Doggone dependable.